Mammoths are staging a comeback. They're turning up everywhere. We've known about them forever. Can we get close enough to uncover the truth behind their mysterious collapse? Woolly mammoths roamed the planet for about 250,000 years. The last holdouts vanished from Siberia about 10,000 years ago. What caused the die-off? The story begins at the last ice age, known as the Pleistocene. It began about 1.8 million years ago and lasted until about 11,700 years ago. The continents had already moved to their current positions. Sheets of ice covered large parts of Europe as well as the other continents. The climate was much colder and drier than it is today. Average global temperatures were about 41 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit below today's norms. Most of the water on Earth's surface was frozen. Rainfall was about half of what it is today. Sea levels sank almost 400 feet. Whole bodies of water dried up or froze. The British Isles became part of the continental landmass. One Ice Age feature was an area known as the tundra steppe, a kind of prairie. Steppes are areas too dry to support a forest, but not dry enough to become desert. And they're ideal environments for giant meandering grazing machines. The tundra steppe developed into a mammoth mecca. It stretched across northern Asia, Europe, and into much of North America. But some smaller regions seem like mammoth graveyards. They just keep producing bones. And one of them is the Rotterdam harbor. Mol keeps getting results. Along with the mammoth jaw, Mol uncovers a couple of teeth that slip right into place. And a series of bones, including a leg bone that weighs about 60 pounds. Then Mol hits pay dirt, the tusk of a mammoth bull.
Stoßstab eines Mammuts. Richtiges Elfenbein, aber 40.000 Jahre alt.
Tusks are like mammoth diaries. They contain a record of the individual's age, health, and diet. Mol will keep a careful eye on this ivory time capsule until he can have it analyzed. For him, it's another bit of evidence in the ultimate cold case. With so many specimens and improved technology, scientists have been able to put together a detailed dossier on these prehistoric pachyderms. They know that the woolly mammoth was the last in a line of supersized ancestors. Here's what happened. The first mammoths rumbled out of Africa about 3 or 4 million years ago. Experts believe that years of drought triggered the migration. No rain meant no food for these hungry herbivores. So the mammoths moved north and eventually occupied most of Eurasia. They were called southern mammoths because the first fossils of one were found in southern Europe. With a shoulder height of roughly 13 feet, the southern mammoths were the group's Goliaths. In the early Pleistocene, about 2 million years ago, a group of southern mammoths took advantage of low sea levels and crossed into North America via the Bering Strait. By the middle of the Pleistocene, a new North American species had evolved, the imperial mammoth. Then, in the late Pleistocene, a new Columbian mammoth split off. Its range covered the present United States and as far south as Nicaragua and Honduras. Meanwhile, back in Eurasia, yet another species of mammoth, the steppe mammoth, evolved, a stage post on the way to the final mammoth type. It was here, later in the Pleistocene, that the woolly mammoth made its debut. By mammoth standards, it was pint-sized, but tough enough to cross the Bering Strait and travel as far south as present-day Kansas. Along the way, it developed a multi-layered, weather-resistant outer shell. Mammoths were herbivores, surviving on a purely plant-based diet of mainly grass and sedges. Other animals benefited from the mammoth's big appetite. They not only grazed the steppe, they fertilized it and provided easy meals for other creatures down the food chain. But they left more than dung behind. Over the years, tens of thousands of mammoth molars have been found. Most are wisdom teeth, and it turns out there's wisdom in those wisdom teeth. By following the teeth trails, scientists have been able to trace the migratory paths of different mammoth species. In fact, the only reliable way to identify the different mammoth species is by the number of enamel ridges on their molars. Early mammoths had few ridges. As new species evolved, the number of ridges increased to grind up a wider variety of vegetation.
Woolly mammoths got 6 molars on each side of their jaws during lifetime. These molars had high crowns and lots of these thin enamel plates or lamellae to grind down the tough grasses of the mammoth steppe. When the last tooth was worn away, that was the end. The animal starved.
Like their elephant cousins, mammoths were social animals. They traveled the steppe in herds, led by an alpha female. Alongside the alpha female, younger females, calves, and young bulls formed the rest of the herd. Adult mammoth bulls patrolled the Ice Age steppe as loners. They could weigh up to 5.5 tons each and reach a shoulder height of nearly 10 feet. They looked similar to African elephants today, except for their tusks, which were much longer and grew in a spiral pattern. Mammoths used their tusks to dig for food, but more often they functioned as weapons used to intimidate or gore predators and rivals. The tusks featured dramatic curves and could easily be up to 16 feet long. They can also record trauma and other profound life events, such as a young male reaching sexual maturity around its 12th year. At that time, the mammoth is driven away from its herd by its mother. Tusk marks can show signs of the brutal must battles that adult males wage to determine who could mate. One problem with interpreting mammoth tusks is that they almost never come with mammoths attached, so there's no proof that the tale the tusks tell is accurate. That was until 2007. On a May morning on the Yamal Peninsula in northwestern Siberia, a reindeer herder discovered a petite corpse. Other than the missing hair and toenails and the damage she sustained after her discovery, Her only flaw was a dent in her face, just above her trunk. Not bad for 37,000 years on ice. She was named Liuba, after the reindeer herder's wife. Here was Fisher's chance to prove his tusk timeline theory. Milk tusks grow from gestation through the time in the womb, almost 2 years. By examining her teeth, internal organs, and stomach contents, Fisher could compare what her tusks said with the corresponding forensic evidence. Liuba's premolars and tusk revealed that she had been born in the late spring and was only a month old when she died. A CT scan of Liuba showed traces of sediment in her trunk, throat, and bronchial passages. This suggested that she died after inhaling mud and suffocating. The CT evidence suggested an accidental death, a life of good days coming to an abrupt end. The scenario matched the one Fisher had read in her tusks. It was the proof he was looking for. And another step forward in the quest to find out what triggered the extinction. The Etosha Pan is a large dry lake bed within Etosha National Park, one of Namibia's largest wildlife parks. The pan is mostly dry, but during the rainy season, it will acquire a thin layer of water. And sometimes, the flooding waters sweep mud away and expose mammoth fossils. Very little is known about these enormous African ancestors, so anytime there's a find here, it's particularly exciting news. A team has been waiting patiently for the water to recede enough to excavate. Now that it's shallow enough to dig, Mole is on his way. Mole will work with Dr. Martin Pickford, a paleoanthropologist, and his team. The next day, the team lays out a grid to record the exact position of each mammoth fossil. Only then can the dig begin. The bone is carefully cast in plaster. Then wrapped for transport. Not far away. As they reconstruct the ancient skeleton, a portrait of the ancestral mammoth begins to take shape. It seems to have a longer body than its more evolved counterparts. It has straighter tusks and larger ears. Mammoth extremities, like ears and tails, became much smaller over time to withstand the brutal cold. But along with the mammoth fossils, the remains of tortoises and flamingos suggest a habitat far different from that of today.
This area now is steppe. It's just grass with a few bushes. But 4 million years ago, we had palm trees growing here and big trees, and that would be the food for the mammoth. So that mammoth was living in a woodland environment, much more humid than it is today here.
And so the Great Migration began, and with it, the kinds of adaptations required to survive global climate change. At the same time, the growing human population was on the move. They had a healthy respect, almost a reverence for their woolly allies. There's evidence that humans sometimes hunted mammoths for food and made good use of the leftovers. Their bones made sturdy tent poles. And with little wood available in the grassy steppe, mammoth scraps could be burned as fuel. These images of woolly mammoths scratched on slate are 15,500 years old. They seem like rough sketches, yet they include the signature features of a mammoth, its shaggy coat, and the distinctive sloping back. But cave art also suggests that Ice Age humans were justifiably wary of mammoths. In this scene, hunters have killed a reindeer and have enough meat to feed their clan for several days. But a bull blocks their way back to camp. Knowing that mammoths are quick to defend themselves, the humans think better of disturbing the megabeast and decide to wait it out. For many thousands of years, humans and mammoths lived side by side. Then, about 13,000 years ago, more than 3/4 of the large Ice Age animals, including woolly mammoths, died out. For years, scientists have debated the cause of the extinction, with both of the major causes, human overhunting and climate change, insufficient to account for such a mega die-off. Recent research suggests that an extraterrestrial object, possibly a comet about 3 miles wide, may have exploded over southern Canada, nearly wiping out all Stone Age culture as well as mammoths. One thing is certain: the onset of the warm period made their lives difficult. Dark skies and rain signaled the end of the golden age of the mammoth steppe. In Europe, the mammoth's home was forever changed. Higher precipitation patterns in summer and winter caused forests to grow and spread. Other animals adapted to these new conditions, but without abundant grass, the mammoths faltered. As they were driven further north, a damp tundra began to replace the dry mammoth steppe. Gradually, the animals died out, first in West and Central Europe. For thousands of years, Siberia remained their only refuge. The last surviving population lived on remote Wrangel Island off the coast of northeast Siberia. They finally disappeared around 3,700 years ago, when the Great Pyramids were already 1,000 years old. But they didn't disappear without a trace. Far from it. In 1901, the Bersoka mammoth, an adult bull, was uncovered in the Siberian permafrost. Its leg was broken, likely the result of a fall. The highlight of the find was that the remains of its stomach were intact. Then in 2013, Russian scientists were back in Siberia. This time they hit the jackpot. A frozen woolly mammoth in such good condition, it still contained tissue. And blood. Physiologists at the University of Aarhus used the Jarkov mammoth's hemoglobin to conduct temperature experiments. They discovered that while most mammals need a high body temperature for hemoglobin to function, the woolly mammoth was different. Even at near-freezing temperatures, the mammoth's hemoglobin still kept oxygen-rich blood flowing to its extremities.
And this radically reduces its energy requirements. During the winter especially, when it'd be dark 24 hours a day, the plants that they eat are dead and senesced and of very low nutritional quality. So this was a key component of their survival.
The news of mammoth blood made headlines, and the conversation quickly turned to the subject of cloning. Were we now ready to try and clone a woolly mammoth? So far, all efforts to clone a woolly mammoth have failed. The ancient DNA is too fragmented. As fond as they are of mammoths, the experts at McMaster think cloning would be a mistake.
I have a hard time understanding the real point of bringing back a woolly mammoth. Would the boy in me like to see a mammoth? Of course. I mean, we'd all like to see these extinct animals, but the problem is there's no real surrogate climate for them currently. You can't bring a single individual back. You need to bring back hundreds to have a breeding population.
Just like today's elephants, mammoths were highly social animals. They needed contact with their own species to flourish. And what of its lost world? Its real home, the mammoth steppe, disappeared with the end of the Ice Age. Cloned mammoths would likely languish in a zoo, completely dependent on humans.
I do think there's some benefit to it. If de-extinction brings attention to the extinction events that happened and what is looming because as humans we continue to encroach on land, then I think it's been successful in that sense. Success to me doesn't mean I open up the curtain on a stage and there's a little woolly mammoth running around. That's not, I wouldn't call that success. That's a park right? It's an exhibit at a zoo, which I don't think many people would want to see.